Why do you run from the very darkness that promises to make you whole? You look in the mirror and mistake the carefully curated mask you present to the world for your actual reality, completely blind to the fact that your frantic flight from discomfort is precisely what anchors you to your misery. You call it self-preservation, anxiety, or simply choosing peace, but let us strip away the comfortable lies of the ego. It is cowardice dressed in the garments of virtue. Every time you turn your back on a confrontation, every time you swallow your true voice to maintain an artificial harmony, and every time you distract yourself with mindless noise, you are not protecting your identity, you are actively burying it alive. The internal tension you feel right now is not a malfunction of your mind, it is the desperate, suffocating cry of your true self, demanding that you look at what you have spent a lifetime avoiding. This dynamic of avoidance is not a passive shield, but an active, aggressive suppression of your internal reality that splits your psyche into warring factions. You live in a state of perpetual psychological warfare, projecting your own unacknowledged failures onto your colleagues, your partners, and the world at large, wondering why life feels so hollow and repetitive. You are trapped in a self-made prison of symptoms, chronic fatigue, sudden bursts of unexplainable irritability, and a profound sense of meaningless, because you refuse to acknowledge the treasure buried within your own darkness. The promise of this exploration is not comfort, nor is it the cheap validation of modern positive thinking, but a systematic dismantling of your illusions. We are going to examine how your instinct to flee, when consciously understood and flipped upon itself, ceases to be a pathetic retreat and becomes the ultimate, devastating tool for your psychological liberation. 1. The fiction of the functional mask. You believe your personality is a solid, self-determined structure, yet it is nothing more than a patchwork quilt of compromises made to survive other people's expectations. The face you wear to work, the voice you use with your family, and the opinions you parrot to feel accepted are parts of a functional fiction we call the persona. It is a necessary social currency, yes, but you have made the fatal mistake of believing you are the mask. When you flee from a situation because it just doesn't feel like you are not protecting your essence, you are protecting a fragile, artificial construct that cannot bear the weight of reality. This identification with the persona creates an agonizing internal division because the psyche cannot be cheated by social approval. While your ego basks in the praise of being compliant, reliable, or perpetually cheerful, your deeper nature is starving in the dark. The energy required to maintain this facade is immense, draining your vitality and leaving you with a profound sense of exhaustion that sleep can never fix. You find yourself reacting with sudden, irrational venom to minor inconveniences because the suppressed parts of your being are clawing at the walls of your conscious mind. Look closely at your last major argument or your most recent wave of resentment. You will find that you were not defending a sacred truth, but rather defending the illusion of who you think you are supposed to be. The moment you begin to run away from this false identity is the moment you stop betraying your own soul for the sake of social convenience. It is a painful awakening to realize that the good person you have spent years building is actually a warden keeping your true potential locked in a cell. True power begins not when you perfect the performance, but when you deliberately allow the stage to burn down. 2. The anatomy of your internal fugitive. You are running, but you refuse to turn your head to see what is chasing you, terrified that a single glance backward will shatter your sanity. This running does not always look like physical flight. More often, it manifests as your frantic busyness, your obsession with productivity, or your digital addictions. You fill every silent crevice of your day with noise because silence is a mirror that reflects the chaos you are desperate to ignore. You are a fugitive from your own depths, treating your own unconscious mind as if it were a lawless wasteland populated by monsters. The tragedy of the psychological fugitive is that the velocity of your escape determines the strength of the pursuer. What you fail to realize is that the shadow, the repository of everything you have judged as unacceptable, weak, or dangerous about yourself, is fueled by your avoidance. The more you sprint toward artificial light and superficial positivity, the longer and darker your shadow grows behind you. It watches your choices, waiting for the moments when your conscience will falter through fatigue or stress, and then it strikes, causing you to sabotage your relationships and career. Consider the patterns you call bad luck or accidental slips of the tongue. These are not accidents, they are the calculated interventions of your unconscious, breaking through your defenses because you refuse to give it a seat at the table. Your flight is an admission of defeat before the battle has even begun, a declaration that you are too fragile to look at your own capacity for malice, greed, or raw ambition. The shift occurs when you realize that running away from the shadow is a race you are guaranteed to lose. The only escape that matters is escaping the illusion that you can live as a halved, mutilated version of a human being. 3. Splitting the self, the cost of artificial peace. You pride yourself on being a peacemaker, a person who avoids conflict at all costs, yet you fail to see that your external peace is bought with the currency of internal bloodshed. Every time you nod in agreement while your stomach knots with disagreement, you are amputating a piece of your psychological integrity. You believe you are being kind, patient, and mature, but in reality, you are accumulating a toxic debt of resentment that will eventually poison your entire emotional landscape. This artificial harmony is a slow-acting poison that erodes your capacity for genuine connection. When you split your psyche to keep the outer world calm, you create a dangerous polarization within yourself. The thoughts you refuse to utter do not vanish, they sink into the unconscious, where they ferment into bitterness and malice. You become passive-aggressive, punishing people with your silence, your coldness, or your sudden withdrawal, all while maintaining the innocent posture of a victim. You have traded your authentic power for a counterfeit safety, and the price is the slow death of your passion and creativity. Think about the relationships where you feel most safe yet most dead. These are the spaces where you have successfully eliminated all conflict by eliminating all truth. You have run away from the discomfort of boundaries because you fear abandonment more than you value self-respect. The breaking point arrives when you realize that this manufactured peace is actually a state of psychological stagnation. To flee from this stagnant safety is not an act of destruction, but a necessary rebellion against a life that is merely a polite rehearsal for the grave. 4. Projection and the myth of the external enemy. You are utterly convinced that the people who irritate, offend, or oppress you are the objective source of your misery. You spend hours analyzing their flaws, complaining about their behavior, and plotting your emotional escape from their influence, completely blind to the mechanism of projection. The reality is far more disturbing. The traits that infuriate you in others are the very qualities you have disowned and suppressed within yourself. Your enemy is not outside, they are a mirror reflecting your own hidden, unlived life. When you project your shadow onto another person, you give them immense power over your emotional state, rendering yourself a helpless casualty of their actions. If you despise someone's arrogance, it is often because your own unexpressed desire for recognition is screaming for release. If you are disgusted by someone's weakness, it is because you have never permitted yourself to be vulnerable or imperfect. Your flight from these individuals is actually a desperate attempt to run away from the mirror, to smash the glass before it forces you to recognize your own features in the monster. Recall the last person who made your blood boil with irrational intensity. Strip away their actual behavior for a moment and look at the emotional charge they triggered inside you. That disproportionate rage is the unmistakable signature of the unconscious mind recognizing itself. By running away from the mere presence of these people without understanding the projection, you guarantee that you will meet the exact same archetype in the next job, the next relationship, or the next city. You cannot outrun a ghost that is riding in the passenger seat of your own mind. 5. Sacrificing the false self to the fire of truth. You cling to your suffering because it is familiar, preferring a miserable certainty to the terrifying vastness of the unknown. To step out of your repetitive cycles requires the death of the person you have spent your entire life pretending to be, and that is a sacrifice your ego will fight to the death to avoid. You come seeking solutions, but what you truly want is a way to change your life without having to change yourself. You want the rewards of transformation without the agony of the crucible. The process of individuation, of becoming the whole, unique being you are meant to be, demands a ruthless demolition of your psychological comfort zones. It requires you to look at your cherished victimhood, your sacred wounds, and your favorite excuses, and recognize them as tools of manipulation. You have used your pain as a shield to avoid the terrifying responsibility of freedom. When you run toward comfort, you are running away from the only fire that can burn away your illusions and leave behind what is real. Look at the crises in your life not as tragedies, but as necessary interventions of the psyche designed to break your stubborn ego. The depression that immobilizes you, the anxiety that keeps you awake, these are not random illnesses, they are the hands of your deeper self, dragging you down into the underworld because your conscious direction has become a dead end. Fleeing from this downward pull is fleeing from your own cure. You must learn to run into the collapse, to let the false self be destroyed, so that the authentic core of your being can finally breathe. 6. The holy withdrawal, using flight as a psychological weapon. There is a form of running that is not cowardice, but the highest expression of strategic wisdom, the conscious, absolute withdrawal from a corrupt collective. When you look around at the demands of modern society, the endless consumption, the performative morality, the superficial noise, you are looking at a mass psychology that demands your total assimilation. To conform to a sick society is not health, it is a collective psychosis. In this context, choosing to flee, to disconnect, and to become unreachable is an act of supreme psychological warfare. This is what I call the holy withdrawal. It is not a panicked retreat born of fear, but a deliberate relocation of your psychic energy from the outer world to the inner landscape. When you withdraw your participation from the games of status, validation, and social compliance, you starve the parasites that feed on your vitality. You stop pouring your sacred attention into containers that cannot hold it. This flight is a declaration of independence that allows you to gather your scattered fragments and consolidate your strength. Analyze where you currently spend your emotional currency. Are you fighting battles that do not belong to you, trying to fix people who refuse to change, or seeking approval from systems that view you as a statistic? If so, your persistence is not noble, it is masochistic. Turning your back on these drains is your greatest power. By fleeing the collective circus, you create the necessary isolation where the unconscious can speak without being drowned out by the screams of the crowd. It is in the desert of your isolation that your true authority is born. 7. Navigating the abyss of the unconscious. When you finally stop running from yourself and turn inward, you will immediately be confronted by an overwhelming, terrifying chaos. The initial stage of this journey is not a peaceful meditation, it is a descent into an abyss where all your coordinates are lost. You will feel as though you are losing your mind because the neat, logical structures of your ego are utterly useless against the tidal waves of the unconscious. This is the stage the ancient alchemists called the nigredo, the blackness, the state of disintegration. Most people panic at this threshold and immediately run back to their old distractions, preferring their familiar chains to the terrifying uncertainty of liberation. They mistake the descent for madness, failing to see that the breakdown of the ego is the prerequisite for the breakthrough of the self. In this abyss, you must learn a new way of moving. You do not conquer the chaos, you endure it. You must look at the bizarre dreams, the irrational fears, and the long-buried traumas not as enemies to be eradicated, but as estranged children seeking integration. Think of your deepest, most shameful secret, the thought you would never share with another living soul. That secret is the doorway to your power. By refusing to flee from its ugliness, by standing firm in the presence of your own internal abyss, you begin to bridge the gap between the conscious and the unconscious. It is a grueling, agonizing process that strips you of your vanity and pride. But if you do not run, if you allow the waves to break over you, you will discover an immovable center within yourself that no external storm can ever shake. 8. The birth of the individuated master. You have spent your life looking outward for a savior, a guide, or a set of rules to tell you how to live, completely unaware that the only authority that matters is waiting to be forged within your own psychological furnace. The culmination of this painful journey of avoidance, confrontation, and integration is the birth of the individuated individual. This is a person who has stopped running from their darkness and, instead, has married it to their light. You become a complete, self-contained force, no longer dependent on the validation or permission of the world. An individuated person is inherently dangerous to the collective because they cannot be manipulated through guilt, fear, or the desire for compliance. They have looked into their own depths, seen the capacity for the worst human evils within themselves, and consciously chosen to act with integrity. Their strength is not a rigid, brittle armor, but a fluid, adaptive resilience. When you reach this state, your ability to withdraw, to say no, and to walk away from situations that compromise your soul becomes an effortless, devastating expression of your sovereignty. Look at the transformation that occurs when you no longer need the world to tell you who you are. The anxieties that once paralyzed you dissolve because you have already faced the worst critic, yourself. The relationships you choose are no longer desperate alliances born of loneliness, but conscious unions of whole beings. You have flipped the instinct of flight. You no longer run away from life out of fear, but you run away from the illusions of the world out of an unshakable allegiance to your own truth. This is the ultimate power that was hidden inside your cowardice all along. You stand at a fork in the road of your own psychological destiny, and the choice you make right now will dictate whether you become a conscious creator or a tragic casualty of your own unconscious patterns. To continue on your current path of comfortable avoidance is to condemn yourself to a life of quiet desperation, a life where you will constantly complain about your fate while actively feeding the monsters that create it. The discomfort you feel in this very moment is the friction between the person you are pretending to be and the vast, untamed potential that is begging to be realized. Do not push this tension away, and do not seek a quick emotional fix to soothe the sting of these words. Let the wound stay open, let it burn, because that pain is the only thing accurate enough to cut through the thick crust of your illusions. You have spent a lifetime running from the dark, never realizing that the dark is exactly where your gold is buried. If this brutal confrontation with your inner world has shattered the illusions you used to protect your comfort, then you have taken the first, agonizing step toward a reality that most people spend their entire lives desperately avoiding. Do not allow your ego to slip back into the numbing sedation of forgetfulness. Ensure your place in this psychological crucible by subscribing to this channel immediately. I demand that you descend into the comments below and state, with absolute, terrifying honesty, the exact illusion or false mask you have had the courage to recognize within yourself today. Do not write a generic compliment or a superficial summary. Give voice to the hidden truth you have been running from, for the moment you speak its name in the light, its power over your destiny begins to wither and die.